former Colorado corner Cormani McClain heading from Colorado to TBD, but the pick is for the Florida Gators from both Steve Wiltfong and Pete Nakos. So from where I'm sitting, where there's smoke, there's fire. If that's the leader in the clubhouse, according to Pete Nakos, he'd be wildly surprised if there was any other school that got involved. If you're a Florida fan, you're a college football fan, period, this is a little bit of a head scratcher. And we'll talk about why right now, but before we get to that, make sure you are subscribed right here to the On3 YouTube channel. College football, transfer portal, whatever you love about this sport, I promise you we talk about it and we do our best to embody it as a show every single day. We're live 3 times a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern. We are also full hour-long episodes on podcast. Apple, Spotify, you type in the hard count with JD Piquel, we will pop up for you. We'll have a good time, and we'll keep a good thing going. So with that plug out of the way, in some ways, seeing Cormani McClain picked to end up at Florida is a bit of a head-scratcher because I think he did play it very close to the vest, and so it wouldn't be impossible for other big schools to have been in the mix here and it didn't come to light. But from the outside looking in, it's like USF is in the mix, some other G5 schools in the mix, you hear about Memphis, and then this SEC school in Florida comes out of nowhere seemingly and ends up being the school to beat for him. And so on one hand, you're like, well, why is Florida the anomaly here to land Cormani McClain? Why are they the only big school that we can tell that's in the mix? And the other part of this is if you're Florida, it feels like they're trying to get their feet underneath them from a culture standpoint. Like they have had some years that they, quite frankly, don't believe are up to their standard. Some of that you could look at the locker room and say, well, if we want to be better overall, it doesn't make sense for us to add someone to this locker room that doesn't necessarily have a winning pedigree to his name. And I'm not talking about him coming from Colorado. I'm talking about the way that Deion Sanders talked about him at Colorado. Because Deion Sanders was asked during the year last year, hey, how do you, what does Cormani McClain have to do to get on the field? Because he wasn't playing. He was a 5-star recruit. He was one of these massive acquisitions for Deion Sanders from that previous class. And Deion Sanders basically, to put it simply, is like he's got to show up on time. He's got to handle his business. Essentially implying for us that Cormani McClain maybe has some maturing and growing up to do. And so, again, if you're a Florida fan, you're like, yeah, guy's talented, but do we really want to add that to our team as we're trying to fight and scratch and claw to get this team back to where we expect it to be? Is that really helping us achieve our overall goal? This, to me, the first thought I had, the first reminder, the first feeling I had, it reminded me a lot of Agiye Hall when he transferred from Alabama to Texas. Now, I'm not saying every single circumstance is the same here, but Agiye Hall transferred from Alabama to Texas. The feeling was, yes, really good player. There's a little bit of risk involved when you bring him onto your football team for what he means to you culturally and what he means to the locker room and all those things. Now, outside looking in, Agiye Hall wasn't a fit at Texas, ended up transferring out. He's now walking on at UCF, and shouts to Agiye Hall, super talented. Hope he ends up having a tremendous career at UCF. But ultimately, it's fair to say that he wasn't a fit at Texas, and the locker room, the culture, was strong enough to withstand him not being a fit. And so Billy Napier saying, hey, I think we may be able to get Cormani McClain if it ends up happening that way. In some ways, to me, this is Billy Napier betting on his building and betting on his locker room, betting on his culture. Because is he talented? Can he help us if we're Billy Napier? Yes. So the worry is, okay, well, does he bring some guys down with him if he doesn't do what he's supposed to do? Does his attitude and does his immaturity or potential immaturity end up hurting us as a locker room? Billy Napier is saying, I don't think so. Billy Napier is saying, I think what we have is strong enough to where we can bring in someone talented, bring them along, help them, and we can go forward from there. It's also worth noting that maybe Cormani McClain, his experience at Colorado, period, he's learned and he's matured and he's gone forward from there as well. He also did come on at the end of last year for Colorado and play in some games and sounded like he started doing things in the right way. The reason why I don't think it's as crazy, if you're a Florida fan, Florida had a lot wrong last year. All right, you don't go 5-7 with having a lot of things right. But one of the things that I don't think was wrong at Florida a season ago was culture. The reason why I say that, you can spot culture most visibly in a losing streak. Like you're 10-0, you're 13-0, you're going to the college football playoff. You could have some guys that aren't tremendous culture guys, but you would never be able to tell that because vibes are high, winning cures everything. When you're losing the way that Florida did last year, losing their last 5 in a row, you see guys throwing the towel. and you start to see those blowouts pile up and you see bad losses pile up. And I'm not calling any of those losses good losses for Florida, but there was 0 games that I saw where Florida was like, forget this, man. Forget Florida football. Forget Billy Napier. They battled all the way through. The Missouri game, horrific loss. Horrific loss. Everybody and their mama in Gainesville probably has a feeling of nausea when they think about that game. 4th and 17, you let up a first down. As the team in Missouri that won the Cotton Bowl last year. Florida took them to the wire after they had lost multiple games in a row. The Arkansas game is an overtime heartbreaker. Pushed them to the limit. Florida State. Yeah, I know Florida State didn't have their starting quarterback in that game. It was a rivalry game, so there's a reason to get up for it. But that was a game now where Florida's like lost a few in a row now. If they didn't have a strong culture or have some culture to begin with, they would have thrown in the towel. That would have been it. They would have said, whatever, we're done with this. Push Florida. Or push Florida State, rather. So I'm not trying to give any excuses for losses, but I am saying the culture, to me, doesn't seem to be the glaring issue. And so going back to what I said about Cormani McClain, if he ends up at Florida, seems like they have a culture in place, or Billy Napier feels like they have a culture in place to be able to support him, bring him along, and allow him to have success. So I'm not saying it's going to work. I'm not saying Cormani McClain shows up there, starts day one, ends up being a baller for them in the SEC. It could happen. Definitely could happen. But I'm saying I think the approach, if you're a Florida fan, is if this works for us, great. If it works, awesome. But if not, it's not going to bring anybody down with us because we have a strong enough culture, a strong enough locker room to withstand any potential issues that adding someone to our locker room that isn't about what we're about could have. And that's kind of been my, not to get too far down a rabbit hole here, that's kind of been my thought around Clemson for a long time here. Dabo Swinney seems to be really protective of his culture. We don't want anybody that's not going to be about what we're about into this building. You know, we want to protect it. But, like, if your culture is as strong as you think it is, and Billy Napier clearly thinks it's strong, then you can add a couple players that necessarily don't do the things the way that you do them. You can bring them on, bring them up to speed, acclimate them, and you're not risking your culture to do that. So does Cormani McClain end up at Florida? I trust Pete Nakos and I trust Steve Wiltfong. We'll keep an eye on this. We'll have thoughts for you as soon as that becomes a reality, if it does. But I don't think that necessarily this is a massive risk for the locker room or massive risk for the culture, or any of those things. If Cormani McClain ends up at Florida, Billy Napier is betting on his locker room, betting on his way of doing things, and betting on the foundation that he's built, that his team can bring him along, and at the very worst, they can withstand bringing someone in that maybe doesn't do things the way they want them to do them. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.